everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this Heritage Month event. I'm delighted to see so many people in the audience. I was worried it was sort of a niche topic and I wouldn't get many takers, so thank you all for coming. So as Miranda said, my name is Heather. I'm the City Archivist here at the Ian Matheson City Archives, which is part of the Palmerston North City Council. And my topic today is inventing in the Manawatū in the decades around the turn of the 20th century, so the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And I've chosen a specific focus on what I've chosen to describe as hobby inventing. And what I mean by that is people inventing outside of their core profession successfully, or much more often not so successfully. So when I heard the theme for this year's Heritage Month was innovation, I immediately thought of how that related to the field of invention. When I was working down at the Wellington City Council Archives, I described the papers for the Martin family, which included Charles Martin, who was an electrician, a plumber, and also an inventor living in Wellington from 1870 until 1929. And Tupapa has one of his inventions in their collections. It's called the nitram, and it's an electric oven. And the astute among you will realize nitram is Martin backwards, so it's well named as well. I remember at the time thinking, coming across the patent specifications and the mechanical specifications for some of his inventions, thinking that it was a coincidence to come across another inventor's work, because one of my very favorite collections held here in the Ian Matheson City Archives belongs to George W. Shaler, who many of you will know of as a local photographer, but perhaps some of you don't know that he also dabbled in inventing, especially later in his life. So 2 archives, 2 inventors, creating in a similar time frame. It just made me curious about that culture of inventiveness in New Zealand during that time period. It's widely reported that New Zealand had more patents issued at that time than anywhere else in the world. And Heritage Month seemed like a good excuse to delve a little deeper into the subject. So, I probably don't need to say this, as many of you know me, but I'm not a patent lawyer or an expert of any kind. This overview is really just an appreciation of some of the creativity that everyday people took to solve problems, both large and small, as well as an excuse to look at beautiful patent diagrams and specifications for the kinds of things that were made here in the Manawatū. Many of these creations that you'll see in diagrams and patent specifications won't ever have been made. They're just ideas, but as the saying goes, it's the thought that counts. So in today's talk, I'm going to cover what a patent is, how you could get one, who did get one, what kinds of things were being patented at the time, and I'm just going to use examples that I found from the Manawatū. And then I'll finally talk about inventors' clubs, including 2 local inventors' clubs that I could find for Palmerston North. One of the main sources of information I used for innovation comes from patents. I feel like I've said that word 400 times already. But what is a patent, you're probably wondering. And in the most basic sense, it is a legal right that protects an invention, meaning that no one else can make, use, or sell your idea without your permission for a set period of time. To get one, the invention also needs to be new, useful, and inventive, and it also often had to have the potential to be sold or commercialized in some way. The important thing is what a patent isn't is a guarantee of a viable product. It's just a promise that if you did have a viable product, it would be protected. So as an example of a patent design, this is the storm helmet, storm cap, designed by Eketahuna man Digby Parrott, and it was designed in 1920 to protect motorcyclists, stockmen, drivers, those kinds of people out in the elements from dusty, windy, rainy, or stormy weather. You can see it's made of a sort of a leather material, and then it's got a transparent viewing hole in the front, and it apparently was designed to fold up into a compact little parcel in order to make it easier to carry. So if a similar product using the features from this specification came to market, Parrott would be able to prove that his design had come first and hopefully find some kind of legal recourse for that infringement. It's the Intellectual Property Office of New Zealand that maintains the patent database, and you can use it to search for historic patents right back into the first one, which is for a kind of a flax machine or a flax processing treatment. And certain pieces of information have been indexed to allow for text searching, which was very useful, although it's limited to names and dates, titles, and a really basic abstract for a particular invention. So here we can see the title for a patent specification, and it is for James Hopkins Stevens, who was the postmaster of Fielding in the late 1800s, and also quite a prolific inventor. So that's the kind of information that you get from a patent. Unfortunately, it doesn't include any kind of geographical information, which means you can't just search based on the location of where something was created, which made looking for Palmerston North or the Manawatū specifically quite challenging for me. Ensuring that you had the correct details and the correct level of detail to meet requirements for patenting led to the majority of inventors seeking patents to apply for them using something called a patent agent, who would give advice about the viability of a patent, prepare documents, and often, but not always, draw up the diagrams for the patents themselves. And you can see from the diagram that I have up on the screen that they could be incredibly complex, and each of those numbered figures would be described in text as well. So this diagram, I don't know if anyone wants to have a go to guess what it is. Well, that's actually a pretty good guess. It is it's a dry heat boiler designed to aid in the creation of dentures. So, and it was designed by two Palmerston North men, Leo Cyril and David Thomas Dilks, both from in the early 1930s. Palmerston North was probably too small to warrant its own patent office. And so many, in the early part of the period we're looking at, and so many patents actually were sent down to Wellington and went through larger patent offices. For instance, this attaching torch to a bicycle handle, which was designed here in Palmerston North, went through the Henry Hughes Patent Office in Wellington, and Henry Hughes was actually the first patent agent in New Zealand. It was at the turn of the 20th century that Palmerston North land agents, Ravenhill & Co., became representatives for a larger firm called Baldwin and Reynards. And Baldwin and Reynards operated in all the larger centers, and it was in the early 1900s that Palmerston North became one of their representatives. And so we can see here in this photograph the building. It's going to be hard for me to describe, but the two-story building in the corner is the old Bank of New Zealand, and that's on the corner of Church Street. And if you go up towards the buildings, it will, in fact, I can show you. This building here is Ravenhill & Co. And so that's where they were on the square, just sort of near the corner of Main Street. Once a patent was prepared, contents would be sent down to the offices in Wellington, who would take that information and then offer a certificate based on novelty. Although it's my understanding that novelty was not necessarily checking for novelty or verifying novelty was not necessarily the main point of patents at the time. It was more a record-keeping tool to make sure that you could prove the time at which you had an idea. And concepts weren't checked for uniqueness nearly as much as they would be today, for instance. So here's an example of a local man, building man J.A. Belk, who invented improvements in gearing of bicycles. And it's hard to read, but this memorandum is saying that I enclose the formal acknowledgement of your application, but at the same time beg you to refer to specification number 2596, which is Martin's bicycle speed increaser. So obviously he'd been pipped to the post by someone else, and the patent office official had picked that up. How much did it cost to get a patent? Well, it actually fluctuated a lot over time, and the economics behind securing one were pretty complex. You also had to secure patent rights for every market that you wanted to protect your idea. So if you wanted to market something in the United States and New Zealand, you would have to get patents for both markets. Indeed, I've found examples of local people doing just that, of taking out patents in overseas markets. As this is a patent application filed in Canada for some prototype indicators for a motor vehicle. And this patent itself, the reason that it's, you can see sort of its original detail is because it's held here in the Ian Matheson City Archives. And since it's quite stunning, and the details included in the patent are worth seeing, so I've actually brought it along. So if anyone wants to have a look afterwards, you're most welcome to. So this is for Charles Oscar Fisher's improved indicators, and it's from 1925. I just thought I'd show you a little bit of the detail of how this particular invention was meant to work. So the idea was to allow motorists to signal their intention of stopping or turning, which seems like a really good idea. But it wasn't something that was necessarily built into cars at the time. Although, from my research, this is obviously not the first idea for an indicator ever created. It was designed to work at night, though, and had an electrical light display on the boot. We just go back. I won't be able to point it out, but if you sort of look towards the bumper of the car, there's the 3 little circles. Those were designed to illuminate when you had decided which way it is that you wanted to turn based on the press of a button. And then it also, apart from this illumination, was also would sound a horn when you had decided which way you wanted to turn, which sounds like it would make driving around a much noisier process. You could have 1, 2, or 3 hand-shaped pointers attached to either side of your car near the on the steering wheel, and then on the corresponding side, and then also one on your rear bumper. Just depending on how clear you want it to be, it was designed to be. You could have 1 pointer if you wanted. You could have 2. You could have 3. So it's a very modular idea. You could also choose to patent only in certain markets if you wanted to, which would have been more cost-effective, because obviously the more patents you chose to get, the more expensive it would be. And I was surprised to learn that the technology behind self-sealing lids, like on golden syrup tins, was invented by a man in Dunedin who decided only to take out a patent for New Zealand, and subsequently presumably lost substantial royalties when that technology caught on overseas. And given that paint tins and golden syrup tins still use this technology, it probably is quite a penny he missed out on. So I'm not going to go into great detail about the costs of patenting, but it's probably enough for me to say that when patent costs go down, the number of patents go up. And the cost did go down in the 1880s. It was 10 shillings for the application and 6 pence for the form, which is about $120 in today's money, in 1884, excluding the agency fees, which would depend on how complex the design you needed put together was. So before the cost decrease, patenting was generally limited to the professional classes. And it wasn't until those costs lowered that it opened up to other classes, including farmers and skilled tradespeople, like blacksmiths, electricians, and builders. But it really seems to have been part of the zeitgeist, sort of gaining speed at this time, and it led to a substantial increase in the number of patents being issued, which you can see on the graph. As the cost decreased, you really see a sharp increase in those patent numbers coming up. But unfortunately, the increase wasn't equitable across all layers of society, and unskilled workers, women, Māori, other groups were still really underrepresented in the patent numbers, which reflected broader social and economic inequality of the time. Just to go back to women specifically, in 1899, women applied for 2.5% of New Zealand patents, which doesn't seem too bad, but given the social and financial restrictions of the time, it's probably not unexpected. In 1909, Progress magazine, which is a scientific journal that wrote often about inventing and innovation, said of female inventors, "It is only in the last few years that women have turned their attention to inventing, and even now the proportion of patents taken out by women is very small." So that decade hadn't turned the dial much. I found 2 inventions from women in the Manawatū, but there will undoubtedly be many others. So the first patent I found was for something called the indestructible stockings, which sounds fantastic. And it comes from Foxton woman Louisa Catherine Vautier. And unfortunately, this patent, which I'll show you the only detail available, apologies for the quality, that is the quality that's on the patent registry. There's no illustration, rather, to go with this particular patent. And even the description of the innovation is quite small. It basically describes a special kind of stitch put over the bits of stockings that wore more heavily than other pieces. So it's a good idea. The second patent I found came from the Mountford family, who lived out in Fielding, and one of whom, whose name was Anne Barry Mountford. She'd actually married into the Mountford family, and they were both inventors and surveyors. And so her piece of surveying invention seems like it was a reasonable thing for her to do. She was a teacher before marriage, and apparently took quite a lot of interest in her husband's survey work and accompanied him right around the country as he undertook that work. So she obviously saw an improvement that she thought she could make to a piece of surveying equipment, and applied for this patent in around 1890. The Mountford family actually had lots of patents to their name, including an attempt at stabilizing butter for long-term storage and transport. Reports indicate that the butter underwent this process that they had designed, which they called the cold vacuum process. It would last for a year. And one private account stated that 100 gentlemen in Calcutta said the butter was the best fresh butter ever to land in India. The butter, after undergoing the process, the resulting product was a tin of butter, so apparently the convenience probably wouldn't have been as high as just refrigeration, but still a good idea. No particular regions dominated patenting numbers once you take the population differences and account for them. So cities and frontier towns both had high numbers of patents applied for at various times. So this is just one example. This is the Clapham's horse holder, patented in 1911 by Taihape man John Clapham. It seems, based on the newspaper advertisements about this invention, that runaway horses were quite an issue at the time, and leaving your horse unattended with a buggy attached could lead to losing both your horse and your buggy. So this advertisement says, "Hold your horse, sir. No thanks, I use a Clapham horse holder." And it says that only 3.5 crowns stands between you and guaranteed security. In terms of who was applying for patents, as I said, it was more kinds of people were applying for patents after the prices went down. But the president of the New Zealand Inventors Club, which we'll talk about briefly later, thought it was worth mentioning that a striking feature of most invention was that they were created by men and women not associated with a trade or profession which benefited from the invention. And I found lots of examples of this, but just one is local Palmerston North optician Richard A. Nodell, who had several patents to his name, but none of them involved vision. And he had 2 improvements for clothes props and also an improved bicycle pedal. So you could see people were thinking outside of their professions and maybe into their hobbies to gain inspiration for the kinds of things that they wanted to improve. He also had something called the Allies Hand Protector and Polisher, which was a sort of a glove used for cleaning and manufactured in Palmerston North. The last question I had is, what were people inventing? And as you can see, they were inventing all kinds of things. And I'm afraid I can't answer the question in any kind of scientific way. But like anywhere, people seem to be trying to improve technologies that were still developing, and then also solving problems that had been around forever. Car safety seemed to feature heavily around the 1920s. And this particular specification is for Fielding man A.J. Reed's shade attachment to the headlights of motor cars and the like, and means of operating the same. It's essentially the dimmer switch for your headlights. But equally, I came across lots of different kinds of fencing technologies, including Hjalmar Graf's Kapai movable fencing, cooking apparatus like this baking tin from Digby Parrott. Let's see, canning technologies like the Mountford's cold vacuum process, gardening aids, new kinds of bridles like you can see here, and 2 separate fire alarm systems, including this one from James Hopkins Stevens, the postmaster of Fielding, who we met before. Many people have tried their hand at the clothes peg, including 2 local men, one from 1893 by one of the Mountfords, which you can see on the screen here, and the other in 1912 by a man named W. Fairhead. I was interested to see actually that a new patented clothes peg has just come out of Australia, so people are still trying to improve the clothes peg. Inventions were made to solve life's problems, big and small. Watchmaker William Howans of Taihape thought it was too difficult to accurately determine the winner in log chopping competitions, and so he designed a device to signal the winner in a very clear manner. The specification actually says you can use it in a foot race as well, but I have trouble visualizing how you might do that. So now you probably know more than you ever wanted to about patents. I'd like to acknowledge that while they're an important source for understanding innovation, because of their standardized form, they don't tell the whole story. And so I also checked local newspapers to find innovation that wasn't being patented. And this example, received some press coverage, but I couldn't find any patents for it. It comes from local man E. Dilks. And the idea was to capture the sun's heat using a special alloy, which would then generate steam. The special alloy doesn't get described in the article due to commercial sensitivity, but it is reported to have boiled a pint of water in 4 minutes, which is faster than a stovetop, but slower than a modern kettle. It was suggested that once perfected, the technology would be able to harness the moon's rays or even the heat of the air. So it would have been quite something. But after the initial excitement in the newspapers about this wonderful invention that had come from Palmerston North, it disappears off of the records, so it may not have gone anywhere. This invention, which many of you may recognize as something similar to a jolly jumper, comes from Charles Dahl, the bold young Dane of Palmerston North, who is probably more famous for his canvas goods. But he also owned a wickerware factory, and therefore he probably doesn't count as much as a hobby inventor as some of the other people here. But he did have numerous patents across a wide number of fields, and so I thought that indicated his interest in innovation. And I also loved these pictures of the baby nest so much that I really wanted to include them. So the pictures you can see come from Te Manawa Museum, and they have an actual prototype of this, or an actual example of this item, as well as a photograph of it in use. And doesn't the baby look comfortable in the baby nest? Yeah. So when it comes to why did people invent and innovate materially? The expression, the necessity is the mother of invention, is definitely part of it based on what I could determine. At scarcity of materials and the necessary economy of mending over purchase of new goods, even if those new goods, they may not have even been available for purchase. A culture of repair and a fierce and necessary independence due to our New Zealand's geographic location were all reasons why people might look to try their own hand at creating. I think it's also important to remember that we live in quite a disposable age, and things were built to be mended and repaired and reused at the turn of the century, which would have led to a greater handiness than many of us might expect today, and also a greater value placed on items themselves. I mentioned photographer George W. Shaler already, but in terms of invention, he's actually best remembered for his mundane creations. So here is a quote from Valerie Smith's Saga and Sepia about the Shaler family. And she says, "He was a practical man, not given to wild flight of fancy. Most of his patents reflect this down-to-earth quality. They improved everyday things to make life easier for ordinary people, such as himself: a beer holder, a bottle stopper, a mail lock, to name but a few. So you can see people had problems that they were trying to solve for themselves, making life day-to-day better for themselves. The patent register has an entry for George W. Shaler for an improved lid for milk jugs and the like from 1909. The lid was designed to exclude dust and insects from containers of liquid, and they also allowed for the escape of free gases from the jug, I assume if it contained milk. And you can see from the picture, or perhaps you can't see, but the holder just behind this, in front of the spoon, has his name and the patent number on it. He was inspired by a trip to Lake Taupo, where he was bothered by flies dive bombing his jugs of milk, which I guess he had around. And according to family accounts, Lucy Shaler, who was his daughter, and her mother spent hours sewing these jug covers, and many of them were never sold and sat around after his death. So it doesn't always lead to huge success. So here's that same object that illustrated for the patent that he took out for it. I thought it was quite a cute detail that I found references to Shaler being the inventor of a special kind of theater hat, which you would wear so as not to block the view of people sitting behind you in the theater. Apparently, women blocking sightlines was quite a problem at the time, and so the hat was designed for the decorative elements to be removed from the hat and held in the hand like a fan. So I couldn't find a patent for this, although the newspaper article does say that it was patented. But it sort of goes to show that Shaler was known for his creative thinking and also patenting in a lot of different areas. He also, these two glass plates are held in the Eden Mathesonity archives, and the envelopes for them label them as perpetual motion machines. So obviously he was having a think about those, those physics problems that we all wanted answers to. To come back to the motivations for inventing, there are clear cases of men and women observing a problem and thinking, I can do better than that. But ads for prominent patent agents provide clues to other reasons why people might invent, including the promise of wealth, respect, and leisure. Quite a lot is made in newspaper articles about one needn't being a professional to invent, and the character of the shrewd amateur who made millions makes frequent appearances in these advertisements. Some ads also try and strike up a feeling of urgency that a great idea must be patented and with an experienced agent, so that someone else doesn't steal it or pirate your design. Design theft seems to have been quite a concern at the time, which we'll see when we talk about inventors clubs and what they were trying to do. So, inventors clubs. The first of which I found came from 1918. Many groups of people were working to fundraise and help out during the First World War, and inventors were no different. A group called the Manawatū Patriotic Inventors Board, or the Palmerston North Patriotic Inventors Board, depending on the newspaper, first appeared in May 1918. And though my research was not exhaustive, this is the first and only club of its kind that I could find listed in newspapers. The first mention reads, "Some idea of yours may help to win the war. Mechanics, inventors, and efficiency enthusiasts are asked to meet to discuss ways of helping our empire." From L. H. Collinson, convened it. And that name may ring a bell because that's Leopold Henry Collinson of Collinson and Cunningham fame. Another name that you might have recognized from the list of attendees is Arthur Hopwood, who was the local businessman of Hopwood Hardware, and he had a patent of his own for an accounting system, sort of a patent for an idea or a system as opposed to an actual device, but you can see it on the screen how it might have worked. A write-up for the group ran on the 23rd of May, and it was reported that not many attended due to inclement weather. But the committee was able to be appointed, and that the purposes of the group could be determined, which were helping to win the war and bringing about inventions that would assist the military and naval authorities with no thought of financial gain on the part of the board, and that any remuneration would be dealt with patriotically. It's a little bit difficult to know how successful this group ultimately was, because newspaper reports also say that they were sworn to secrecy. The second issue, of course, is the date. You'll have noticed the first meeting was in May 1918, and the war finished later in that same year. So they didn't have a lot of time to operate in. But it was reported that an invention from the board was actively being trialed on a hospital ship, and that deputies had made trips to Wellington to consult with military authorities about 2 further inventions. So if we jump forward a decade, a new group arrives on the scene. It was widely reported in 1927 that the newly formed New Zealand Inventors Club, which was based in Auckland, was the first of its kind in the world. And I sort of pressed X to doubt on this, and found reports of other types of similar clubs in Australia going all the way back to 1902. But according to the newspaper reports, the aim of the club was to act as a parent organization to foster local branches around the country. And at least at inception, members needed to have come up with something that met with the approval of a selection committee. In April 1927, it was reported that the club already had 400 members, which perhaps says something about the popularity of inventing in this time period. However, by May 1929, so 2 years later, it was listed as no longer carrying out its operations. And there didn't seem to be a huge interest in setting up localized clubs. There was talk of setting up one in Whangarei, and then also a branch that was in actuality started in Palmerston North. The club in Palmerston North only fared a little bit better than its national counterpart, but it seems worthwhile to look at the aims of both clubs and see what they were trying to do. Apart from fostering genius, they were trying to provide advice and a place for discussion about patenting and inventing, especially in regards to protecting your ideas. But other goals included offering assistance in crafting ideas, creating competitions for members and for young people, social events, and holding exhibitions at fairs and things like A&P shows. They also hosted inspirational guest speakers. The first mention I can find of this club is in an advertisement that says, all persons interested in invention and the formation of an inventors club should attend a meeting in Freeman's Rooms in the Square. And this invitation comes from local man R.M. Maunder, Roland Moore Maunder, who was a local builder and inventor. The first meeting was held in October 1927. A representative for the National Club actually attended this meeting, but it wasn't well attended otherwise, nor were the rules of the society decided upon at the time. But a small committee was set up to consider what these rules might be. And of the members that are listed for this committee, I was able to find patents for 3 of the men listed. So at least some of them were already engaged in the patent system. R.M. Maunder seems to have been the spokesperson for inventing in Palmerston North at the time, sort of a cheerleader going around to all the lunch clubs and social clubs, addressing about innovation and invention and patenting. One particular invitation was to the Citizens Luncheon Club, and he finished with a demonstration of a local man, Frederick Holgerson's bandage winding machine, which rolled and straightened hospital bandages. And you can see the design for that machine here. And the Inventors Club met until notices stopped in May 1931, so it outlasted the other club, the National Club, by 2 years. Repeated requests for attendance in the advertisements may be an indication of why it ceases to exist. And also the last club meet that's reported gives R.M. Maunder as presenting a an address where he seems to show his frustration with the status of inventors in modern society, saying that they're regarded as cranks and that invention is linked with bankruptcy and suspicion. No one seems to approve of such men, and undoubtedly they did not get the credit they deserved, he says. So that seems to be the end of the Inventors Club in Palmerston North and Inventors Clubs in general until calls for another to be started in Auckland began in the 1940s, which I will not discuss today. Just to come back to Aramander one more time, his experience is an example of how cutthroat the world of inventing could be. So he had 10 patents to his name, but it's for concaboard that he is perhaps best remembered, which was a building material that was made of cement, pumice, and flax fiber, meant to sort of replace the timber that was being used to clad the exteriors of buildings, and it was claimed to be both more durable and lower in cost. Aramander was a builder, and he utilized this in his own practice, so he was really making use of his own patent. And apparently this product was very successful. The first advertisements I found ran in the local newspapers in 1914, and it's reported that it was being manufactured right around the country in the early 1920s. And it's claimed that materials imitating it as closely as the patent would allow were created in the US at the same time. Here's a view of one of the factories from Wanganui. This is from 1923. And according to an article on the subject that ran in the Architectural History Aotearoa Journal, it lasted in popularity right until the 1960s, when declining flax production and also a cost of labor increase led to a decrease in popularity. So unfortunately, despite its success, concaboard proved very problematic for Aramander after a rival company began producing a similar product, which of course he objected to as patent infringement. And this dispute bounced around in the courts for several years before finally being decided in the Supreme Court that Mander's original patent had lacked in specificity, which left the door open for similar products. He appealed, and there was a counter appeal, and it ended up in the Privy Council all the way over in the UK, where finally the decision came down against Aramander. This experience took place in the years immediately preceding the Inventors Club being set up, and so I have to wonder whether part of his interest in setting up a club designed to help people aid against design piracy, I wonder whether that was a factor in setting up the club. So that's probably plenty for me today. I hope you all enjoyed this brief trip through inventing at the turn of the century. I couldn't go into as much detail as I wanted for the patents, and there were 200 other patents I could have included in the speech. If anyone is interested in anything they've seen, I'm happy to share patent numbers with you so you can look up the design specifications at home. And I just had to stop looking for material at some point. There's so much more to be discovered using the patent register and the newspapers to discover innovation. It goes without saying that if any of you have local inventors in the family or local inventions that you'd like to share about, I would love to hear about them. But otherwise, that's all from me. Thank you all so much for attending.